Sexuality has always been and will forever be fluid. When you're too fixated on your personal preferences, then it's easy access to judge, condemn, and even diminish preferences that are different than yours. Then what you end up with is backlash and conflict that you feel you need to protect yourself from. It's the reason the mainstream approach to romance, friendship, and family is so jacked up, regardless of how you dress it up. And it's been that way for centuries. But the conflict and the backlash is there for you to reflect on your own where you are on the sexuality spectrum. Are you sexually attracted to your preferences, or are you sexually addicted to them? The two are not the same. We live in a highly addicted, hyper-fixated society, and we're getting ready to talk about this in a way that you've never heard before. The points in this message may be a little triggering, so if you do not have the mental or the emotional capacity to hold space for it right now, you can click away from this video or pause and come back to it later. If you do have the capacity, thanks for tuning in. Please stay till the end. The traditional spectrum of sexuality, sexual attraction, sexual expression has been limited to what's known as the patriarchal heteronormative narrative. You may or may not have heard of the term before, but for lack of any better simplification, it's the straight identified white man's story of human existence. This story has been branded as the normalized standard because it holds the traditional idea of procreation, and every known generation and organized system on this traceable grid of the planet has enforced it as the only means of procreating and repopulating the earth. You see, procreating is not limited to the XY chromosomes of the biological male and female gender and genitalia coming together through a heterosexual act. There are over 20 other effectively proven ways to procreate human life that are often overlooked and misrepresented because of the limits of this normalized narrative, which is the reason why any other act or expression outside of heterosexuality is deemed unlawful, unnatural, and a threat to humanity. It's so important to know that this patriarchal heteronormative narrative is rooted in imbalanced masculine energy. I tread lightly with using masculinity and femininity terms because they can often limit the overall point to traditional gender roles of biological male being masculine and the biological female being feminine. Hence, the operative term between the two is energy. And based on what we know about masculine and feminine energy, it has little or nothing to do with your assigned or preferred gender, your sexual preference, or your orientation. Imbalanced masculine energy is hyper-focused on logic, structure, roles, and social constructs. It's the epitome of strict surface level thinking. It's all about keeping up an image and performance of what you think someone wants to see, which is completely disconnected from the emotional center, which is where the feminine energy resides. And I'd go as far as to say where the heart of humanity is. But when the masculine energy is imbalanced, the feminine energy reflects that imbalance back, which is representative of being too emotionally reactive and disconnected from divine wisdom and expanded states of consciousness. The result is lots of narcissism, disempowered empathy, sociopathic behavior, misogyny, sexism, superiority, inferiority complexes, and addictions that distort the fluidity of sexuality, sexual attraction, and expression. Attraction in the general sense is not limited to a primal instinct for sexual stimulation and satisfaction. It includes a primal instinct for mental and emotional stimulation and satisfaction as well. An addiction is a fixation. You are fixated on one aspect more than the other. Then you create an entire identity and lifestyle from that fixation. It's the reason many can be sexually stimulated from someone and be mentally and emotionally disconnected from them. They could be mentally and emotionally stimulated from someone and be sexually disconnected from them. That kind of dynamic works for those that lack the awareness of their own imbalance. There's nothing right or wrong about this. It's the reason the way we socially connect is disharmonious and all jacked up. And instead of using the disharmony to put your own imbalances in check, you jump from person to person, or you deprive yourself completely to avoid taking responsibility for the role you've been playing in your own messy, misinformed condition. The spectrum of sexuality isn't as complicated as it may seem when you're allowing yourself to be well informed. The oversimplified heteronormative thought is that if it ain't straight, it's gay and wrong. And that extreme thought dismisses the gray area, which holds space for the bisexuals, pansexuals, demisexuals, sapiosexuals, and the entire asexual spectrum. But because the enforced heteronarrative has created such disharmony, this causes disharmony in the gray area. And it blocks you from challenging your own preferences and the role that you've been playing in latching on and amplifying the mess. Because if you're straight identified, why would you challenge that? It's the accepted story. Bullet dodged, no harm done. But then no matter what you prefer or where you are on the spectrum, sexual frustration comes up. You're not sexually frustrated. You're sexually fixated. And you're confusing that with an attraction and a preference. What you're attracting is more ways to be fixated. Fixations make you string people along while also being strung along, where you end up strangled by your own string, and that makes you frustrated. You're avoiding the very thing you're meant to be doing the most. Be with yourself, by yourself. And no, this is not a punishment. It's a revelation. It's revealing an opportunity for you to see how misunderstood your frustrations are and how imbalanced your energy is. To get you clear on what you actually are attracted to, and to align that with the wholeness of you. Because that checklist of things that say you are straight identified may actually be the things that have been accommodating your brokenness. So, do you really feel frustrated? Or are you feeling unsafe and scared in your own body? Are you really attracted to them? Or are you fixated on sexual stimulation from them while simultaneously using that to cope with feeling unsafe and scared? When you have a fully embodied attraction, mentally, emotionally, and sexually, then this unlocks the next question. Is your attraction a reflection of your wholeness or accommodating your brokenness? As a certified spiritual life coach, my approach to the topic of sex is often assumed to be related to the rightness and the wrongness of it. In other words, any spiritual insights about sex are often assumed to be based on sacred, traditional, organized religious texts and ideologies that reflect the heteronormative narrative. The concept of spirituality, however, is much broader than any religious system or its ideology and its said narrative. The gag is, spirituality and sexuality are one and the same, period. That statement alone is very triggering to those of you that rely heavily on strict religious ideology for unvarnished clarity. However, the result is often much less clear and far more divisive. It separates spiritual from sexual. Spirituality merges them to create harmony. After gaining personal clarity in my exploration of this, I led and moderated online discussion groups and workshops as a Tantra facilitator. Tantra, derived from Middle Eastern philosophy and spiritual practices, translates as weave together in Sanskrit. It is a sexual meditation and transmutation practice that intertwines spirituality and sexuality to be more mindfully and intimately connected during a sexual experience. Sex is one of the most powerful energetic exchanges in our existence. When sexual energy is heightened with self or with another, it can empower or disempower, resolve traumas, or amplify them. Sex is both a noun and a verb. Sex as a noun is related to our biological, assigned, or preferred gender and sexual intercourse, sexual pleasure. Sex as a verb is simply the act of presenting it in a way related to our gender in ways that amplify pleasure. The most common way of having sex is through the traditional penis to vagina intercourse. However, because ways of sexual pleasure have expanded throughout our human history, we deal with many forms of sexual pleasure. The three most common forms are pornography, masturbation, kinks, and fetishes. Let's get into it. Pornography does a really great job at creating exaggerated stories that directly influence and heighten sexual energy. If we are introduced to pornography at a very early age, or willingly or unwillingly had our sexual energy heightened, then we tend to act out in extreme, sometimes compulsive ways that play out in all aspects of our lives, but mostly our sex lives. Because there is a lack of awareness in this heightened compulsive state, it causes us to over-identify with a sexual preference, a sexual role, or even a sexual position. Then we approach dating and relationships as if we are recreating stories from porn scenes. Results vary from individual to individual, of course, but the general concept is the same. Sexual energy, as a result, is continually compromised in our mainstream consciousness. It is evident in our mainstream music, movies, and most forms of advertisements. They say sex sells, but a clearer reframe of this would be sex stories and performances sell. There's a pornographic story and performance to nearly everything. Whether mild or extreme, this kind of performing is inescapable within the scope of our everyday focus. It ultimately causes conflict when it's not harnessed and balanced from within. Otherwise, pornography will be a continual layer of distraction because the focus is too much on the sexual storylines we often create in our minds about the sexual pleasure and the performances we often mimic to bring those stories to life, rather than being fully present with the heightened energy. This leads us to compulsive ejaculation through masturbation and sexual pleasure. Because of the gravity of the conflicting views about this in our mainstream consciousness, there is a lack of awareness when it comes to masturbation and sexual pleasure. Some of these conflicting views are that it's wrong, it's bad, it's sinful, or that it's only meant to be done by someone to us. essentially grouping this behavior within the limits of the heteronormative narrative, a traditional union or marriage, which is added conflict, especially if we fit within the alternative lifestyle category, such as the LGBTQIA+ community. And so thoughts about this, or even to partake in it, would conjure up guilt and shame. Masturbation and sexual pleasure are a part of the practices of bringing the mind's awareness to the exploration and the moving around of heightened sexual energy through all energy centers of the body, not just the genitalia. It is about being fully present with those feelings and those actions. However, if we have been taught against it, then we would not be fully present with it. Therefore, we would be in such a rush to get to the ejaculation so that we can go about our non-sexual business until the pattern repeats itself. Whether we feel connected, nourished, or satisfied before, during, and after the experience wouldn't be that important if only we got to the end of it. But nothing really ends if the pattern repeats itself. It is so important to know that we cannot harmoniously share sexual pleasure with another if we have not shared that harmoniously with ourselves, most of all. Or else we would be projecting the story of the roles and positions onto our partner or partners, causing an uneven exchange of energy and pleasure. Sex is meant to be a fun exploration and less of a goal-oriented performance. Give that fun exploration and full presence to yourself through masturbation. A lot of trauma and insecurities are rooted in the pleasure you're not giving yourself. And what you may think is sexual pleasure would simply be sexualized trauma, blaming your bleeding wounds on people who didn't cut you. This morphs into extreme kinks and fetishes. In other words, if it takes sexualizing some form of abuse mentally, physically, and emotionally for you to have pleasure or to get off, then it would be simply an opportunity for you to look at this a little bit more closely. Now, this part may be a bit of a trigger for those of you that fit into the well-known kink and fetish categories, so breathe deeply and stick with me here, okay? Let me be very clear here. This is not to kink shame. This is also not to go into an exhaustive list of the types of kinks and fetishes one may encounter in their exploration. A gentle reminder here that the default condition of the human experience is trauma. As we are aware, it plays out in many different aspects of our lives, but it often shows up the most in our sexual lives because sexual energy is potent energy. It is a vulnerable space. To say this again in another way, the heightened energy of this amplifies what is resolved or what is unresolved, what is healed or what is unhealed. Traumas that have not been resolved and healed are usually suppressed, and anything that's suppressed becomes an obsession. And these obsessions show up as extreme kinks and fetishes. The operative word here is extreme. Kinks and fetishes are a trigger word, so let us break this down a little bit more. The sexual act in general is a kink. Sensual kissing, touching, rubbing would be inappropriate in certain social settings. It would be considered bizarre behavior. But it is a common form of intimate pleasure. When certain preferences within the sexual act become extremely abusive, extremely degrading, then the line of trauma is blurred. Consciously, we may be looking at it as pleasure, but our physical body and nervous system don't know the difference. This is the reason awareness is so powerful and so important. When we bring awareness to the unresolved traumas in our own personal lives, it neutralizes the extremes within our sex lives. This is not a race to some invisible finish line. This is a process. You are the process. There are communities, online and in person, that hold a safe space to explore the extremities of kinks and fetishes. But we must be completely honest with ourselves, transparent and vulnerable with ourselves, so that we can allow these extremities to be permanently neutralized so that we can harmonize the pleasure within our sexual experiences. The bottom line here is sexual discipline affects every aspect of your life, period. When there's a lack of it, the connections you make are often reduced to easy access for instant gratification or sexualized casual encounters, which then creates more conflict when what you've reduced it to is masked as platonic friendships or friends with benefits, or you use it as a means to diminish and shun anything opposite of your preference. And what you end up with is trauma bonds and codependency, which then creates an even bigger challenge around this because sexual discipline is associated with celibacy and abstinence only. And although I'm an advocate for both and something I recommend in my coaching and in my books, click the link in my description box to explore, it goes much deeper than that. The deeper layer is the ability to build trust, respect, and a mental and emotional connection with yourself in relation to those connected to you as well as your selected partners, so that by practicing sexual discipline, you can effectively communicate your desires and boundaries, create a safe space for difficult conversations, which lead to more fulfilling and fully embodied intimate relationships. If you're satisfied with instant casual gratification and the disharmony of the patriarchal heteronormative narrative, then you can put everything that I've said here on the back burner of your mind and keep living your life. But if you value long-term connection and the ability to challenge and rewrite the role you've been playing in your own narrative, then this message is for you. So, with that being said, this is not about deprivation, but about making intentional, mindful choices, prioritizing mental and emotional connection, and building a deep, meaningful, and safe intimacy with yourself in relation to the partners you choose and the connections around you. And what you get in return is a secure attachment style and the ability to make informed decisions of whether to grow together as a unit with them or grow apart as separate entities. Again, there's nothing inherently right or wrong about the ways in which we explore the spectrum of sexuality. It is ultimately about making peace with the exaggerated stories and performances associated with our experience with sexual pleasure and compulsive behavior patterns. That is when the shift occurs. That is what unlocks us to the ability to be fully present and alert with where we are as we are. That's what creates balance in what we personally prefer and what personally works best for us, so we can create harmony with whomever we share that with. There are no rules in this level of awareness. Let the openness of your heart, the clarity of your mind, and the intelligence of your body rewrite the story. Everything and everyone else will adjust. This is probably the most layered topic I've addressed so far on this channel, and I hope that this video has been able to reveal some of those layers more clearly to give you space to expand your own awareness. If you benefited from this message, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share this with someone that you love and care about. I'd love to hear what you have to say about this. In the meantime, in between time, be kind to yourself, be gentle with yourself, and make the best of this right now moment and the right now moments to come.